It was a regular morning inside Judge Frank Caprio's courtroom in Providence. The benches were filled with people waiting for their names to be called. Most of them there for small violations like parking tickets, expired registrations, or speeding fines. The atmosphere was casual but respectful. Judge Caprio, known around the world for his compassion and fairness, moved through the docket with his usual warmth, mixing seriousness with humor to put people at ease. Next on the list was a middle-aged man who quietly stepped forward. He held his papers nervously, glancing back at his family seated in the gallery. To anyone watching, it seemed like just another routine case, nothing out of the ordinary. The man stood before the judge's bench, waiting to hear his fate. Judge Caprio began reading through the details of the violation. But then, as his eyes scanned the paperwork, something made him pause. He leaned closer to the sheet in front of him and read the man's last name again, almost in disbelief. Pacquiao? Judge Caprio repeated, his eyebrows lifting. The courtroom fell silent. A few heads turned, curious about the sudden change in the judge's tone. The defendant nodded slowly, unsure of what was about to happen. Judge Caprio looked up from the papers, studying the man standing before him. His voice softened, carrying a mix of curiosity and excitement. "Tell me, are you by any chance related to the great Manny Pacquiao?" Gasps and whispers rippled through the courtroom. Some people leaned forward, whispering to each other. Did he just say Pacquiao? Like the boxer? A few even pulled out their phones, anticipating that something memorable was about to unfold. The man hesitated for a moment, then gave a small, humble smile. He nodded. "Yes, Your Honor, I'm part of his family." The entire courtroom seemed to shift instantly. What had started as a simple parking violation now carried a new weight. Judge Caprio leaned back in his chair, clearly moved by the revelation. What Judge Caprio said next left the entire courtroom stunned. The courtroom buzzed with whispers after Judge Caprio's question. Some leaned closer, others exchanged curious glances, and a few chuckled with disbelief. It wasn't every day that someone with the last name Pacquiao stood before Judge Frank Caprio. Judge Caprio adjusted his glasses, still smiling warmly at the man in front of him. "So tell me," he said gently, "how exactly are you related to Manny Pacquiao? The whole world knows him as a champion boxer, a senator, and one of the most admired men of our time." The man cleared his throat. He was clearly a little nervous with the attention, but he stood with quiet dignity. "Your Honor," he began, "Manny Pacquiao is my cousin. Our families go back generations in the Philippines. Of course, he became world famous. But to us, he has always just been Manny, the one who worked harder than anyone else even when we were children." A ripple of astonishment went through the crowd. Some people gasped, others whispered excitedly. For many in that room, the story had suddenly transformed. It was no longer just about a traffic violation. It was about family, legacy, and inspiration. Judge Caprio nodded thoughtfully. His voice softened as he continued. "You know, I've followed Manny Pacquiao's career for years," he said. "I watched his fights. But more importantly, I've read about the work he has done for people. Building homes, feeding the poor, helping children get education. He's not just a fighter in the ring. He's a fighter for justice and compassion." The defendant's eyes brightened. His nervousness began to fade, replaced by pride. "Yes, Your Honor, that is exactly who he is. Even after all the fame and success, he always reminded us to stay humble. He would tell us, no matter how high you rise, never forget where you came from and never look down on anyone." Those words stayed with me. The courtroom fell completely silent. Every person, from the bailiffs to the people waiting for their own cases, listened as if they were part of a story larger than themselves. Judge Caprio leaned forward. His tone became reflective. "You see, that's the kind of lesson I wish everyone in this courtroom could take home today. Many people come here worried, nervous, sometimes even embarrassed. But stories like this remind us that every person has dignity, no matter their mistakes." The man lowered his head respectfully. "Thank you, Your Honor. Manny always told us that titles and wealth don't matter. What matters is how you treat people. That's why, even though I'm standing here today for this mistake, I hope I can carry myself with respect." At that, a woman in the audience, perhaps the man's wife, wiped away a tear. The atmosphere in the room was no longer about punishment or fines. It had become something emotional, almost uplifting. Judge Caprio, never one to miss a chance to connect with people on a deeper level, continued. "I'll tell you something," he said. "Your cousin Manny has inspired millions around the world. And here you are, standing before me reminding us all of that same message of humility. I have to say this is not the usual kind of case we hear in this court." The crowd laughed softly, easing the tension. Even the bailiff cracked a smile. But then Judge Caprio's voice took on a more serious tone. "Let me ask you something. Do you feel that having a name like Pacquiao brings more expectations on you? More pressure, perhaps, to live up to the example set by your cousin?" The man nodded. His expression grew thoughtful. "Yes, Your Honor. People expect greatness when they hear the name. But the truth is, I'm just an ordinary man trying to live a decent life. What I carry with me is not the expectation of fame, but the responsibility of honor. Manny showed us that no matter what, you stand up for what is right and you live with humility. That is what I try to follow." Judge Caprio leaned back, visibly impressed. "That, my friend, is perhaps more important than any championship belt." The audience clapped softly, unable to hold back their admiration. It wasn't common for applause to break out in a courtroom, but this moment felt different. It felt human. The judge allowed the applause, smiling knowingly. Then he lifted his hand gently to quiet the room. "All right," he said. "This has certainly taken an unexpected turn. But I want everyone here to remember what we've just heard. Whether you are a Pacquiao," Judge Caprio nodded gravely. "And that's why he's not only respected as a fighter, but as a symbol of justice and compassion. In this courtroom, we talk about justice every day. But justice is not only about fines and punishments. Justice is also about mercy, about understanding where people come from." The defendant raised his chin, encouraged by the judge's words. "Your Honor, you are right. Manny always reminded us. We don't know the struggles of the person standing in front of us. That's why we must treat everyone kindly. Even now, with my mistake, I stand here hoping people see me as a human being, not just a last name." His honesty struck a chord with the audience. A woman seated with her teenage son leaned over and whispered, "That's a lesson we all need to hear." Judge Caprio let the silence settle before continuing. His tone grew almost fatherly. "I can tell you this. Your cousin has inspired people from every corner of the world. I myself have used his story as an example when talking to young people. A boy who once sold bread on the streets, who had nothing, but fought his way not just into the ring, but into history. And yet he remained humble. That humility, that is the mark of true greatness." The man's voice cracked with emotion as he replied, "Yes, Your Honor, that is the lesson he taught all of us. To never forget where we came from. To stand tall but never look down on others. That is why even today I am proud to carry his name, even if it brings me here in this courtroom for a mistake." The crowd's eyes glistened. Some smiled warmly. Others shook their heads in amazement at how a simple court appearance had turned into something unforgettable. Judge Caprio's own voice softened, filled with empathy. "You know, sometimes I think God sends us little reminders in unexpected places. Today, this courtroom was reminded of humility, respect, and compassion. Not by a champion boxer, but by his cousin, an ordinary man who carries the same spirit." A ripple of applause broke out, gentle but heartfelt. The bailiff usually would have stopped it, but even he let the moment breathe. The judge raised his hand, not to silence but to draw attention back to his words. "Let us all remember something important. Whether you are a Pacquiao or a Caprio or any other name, your value is not in fame or titles but in how you treat the people around you. That is the true measure of a man." The defendant bowed his head, overwhelmed with gratitude. "Thank you, Your Honor, that means more than I can say. Manny always told us that the greatest victories are not in the ring, but in winning people's respect through kindness." Judge Caprio smiled gently. "Wise words indeed. And you've brought them into this courtroom today." The crowd erupted into quiet applause again, this time longer, as if to seal the lesson in their hearts. The case itself was still pending, but it no longer felt like just a case. It felt like a chapter in a larger story. A story about family, legacy, and the power of humility to inspire justice. But the most powerful moment came when Judge Caprio connected Manny's legacy to the very meaning of justice itself. What he said brought the entire courtroom to tears. The courtroom felt transformed. People who had walked in expecting nothing more than fines and legal procedures were now leaning forward, captivated by a conversation that carried far more weight than traffic tickets. The name Pacquiao had opened a door, but it was the values behind the name that filled the room with meaning. Judge Frank Caprio leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving the man before him. His voice was steady but reflective, almost as if he was speaking not just to the defendant but to everyone in attendance. "You know," he began, "I've always admired Manny Pacquiao, but not just because of his skill inside the boxing ring. I admired him because despite all of his victories, he never stopped being humble. That humility, that's a quality the world needs more of." The man nodded, his expression full of pride. "That's exactly who he is, Your Honor. Manny always told us, no matter how far you go in life, never forget where you came from. He never let his success separate him from the people. He built homes for the poor. He visited families who had nothing. He used his blessings to lift others up." Murmurs of agreement spread through the courtroom. It was clear that the crowd wasn't just hearing a personal story. They were witnessing a lesson. Judge Caprio continued, his tone deepening. "In my years here on the bench, I've seen two kinds of people. Some let success make them arrogant, as if they are better than others. And then there are those rare individuals who, no matter how high they rise, carry themselves with dignity and kindness. Manny Pacquiao is one of those rare individuals." The man smiled faintly. "Yes, Your Honor. He always reminded us that greatness is not about titles or fame. It is about service." The judge lifted his hand and gestured gently toward the gallery. "Do you hear that? Service. That is a word we often forget in today's world. Too many people think justice is about punishment, but justice, in its truest form, is also about service. Serving people with fairness, serving communities with compassion, and serving society with integrity." A woman in the gallery wiped her eyes. A young man who had been slouching earlier while waiting for his case now sat upright, visibly inspired. The defendant continued, his voice gaining strength. "Your Honor, Manny used to tell us that life is not about how many times you win, but how many people you help win. That's why when people ask me about our family, I tell them the greatest thing Manny gave us wasn't fame. It was an example. He showed us that you can be powerful and still gentle. You can be respected and still humble." Judge Caprio smiled, clearly touched. "Those are words I wish more people could live by. In this courtroom, I often see people at their lowest moments. They feel judged, ashamed, and powerless. But when I hear what you've just said, I'm reminded that no person should ever be defined by a single mistake. We are all more than that. We are defined by how we treat others." The room was so quiet that one could hear the soft creak of the benches as people shifted in their seats. It wasn't a courtroom anymore. It felt like a classroom of humanity. Judge Caprio leaned forward, his tone almost like a teacher guiding his students. "Let me tell you something. Justice is not just about following the letter of the law. It is about seeing the person behind the case. It is about recognizing their story, their struggles, and their dignity. That's why I believe humility is the foundation of true justice. Because only when we are humble can we see others as equals." The man's eyes glistened as he responded, "Your Honor, that's exactly what Manny taught us. Everyone deserves respect no matter who they are. Rich or poor, famous or unknown, respect is what binds us together." The judge nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Your cousin may be halfway around the world, but his message has reached this courtroom today. And I think everyone here can agree. It's a message worth remembering." A wave of soft applause spread through the room once again. This time, Judge Caprio didn't raise his hand to stop it. Instead, he allowed it, as if giving permission for the people to embrace the moment fully. The courtroom had grown still again, the echoes of soft applause fading into silence. For a few moments, it didn't feel like a courthouse at all, more like a gathering where people came to be reminded of what truly matters in life. But now Judge Caprio gently shifted the focus back to the case in front of him. "Well," he said with a faint smile, "as much as I'd love to continue this conversation all day, we do have a matter before the court." He tapped the papers on his desk, his eyes twinkling with kindness. "You are here today for a parking violation." The room chuckled softly. The contrast between the deep conversation about humility and the simplicity of the violation almost seemed humorous. Even the defendant smiled sheepishly. "Yes, Your Honor," he admitted. "I parked in the wrong zone. It was a mistake." Judge Caprio leaned forward, his voice steady but gentle. "Most people who come here want to explain away their mistakes. They give reasons, excuses, sometimes even stories that don't quite add up. But what I've heard from you today is different. Instead of excuses, you've shared values: respect, humility, service. That tells me something important about your character." The man's shoulders relaxed. For the first time since stepping into the courtroom, he seemed at ease. "Thank you, Your Honor, that means a lot." The judge glanced briefly at the paperwork, then set it aside. "You see, justice is not about punishing every little mistake with the harshest penalty. Justice is about fairness. It is about looking at the whole person standing before you, not just the violation written on a piece of paper." He paused, scanning the room, making sure every person listening understood. "If I only saw you as another name on the docket, I might fine you and move on. But today I see more. I see a man who carries a family legacy of humility. I see someone who, despite standing here for a mistake, has reminded us all that respect is the cornerstone of life. And that is something worth acknowledging." The defendant swallowed hard, his voice cracking slightly. "Your Honor, I don't know what to say. I didn't expect this. I only came here hoping to pay what I owed." Judge Caprio smiled warmly. "And that right there is the difference. You came prepared to take responsibility. Too many people come hoping to escape responsibility. That tells me you understand justice better than most." The gallery murmured in agreement. A young man in the back, waiting nervously for his own case, whispered, "He's right. That guy's owning up to it." The judge continued, his voice now carrying a deeper resonance. "Let me tell you something. Laws exist to guide us. But justice exists to serve humanity. If we apply laws without compassion, we lose the very purpose of justice. I don't believe in crushing people for small mistakes, especially when they show honesty and humility." He turned back to the man. "So here is what I'm going to do. I am going to review this violation, not through the lens of punishment, but through the lens of fairness." The man's heart seemed to stop for a moment. The courtroom leaned in, waiting for the decision. Judge Caprio flipped through the paperwork once more, then set it down with finality. His voice was firm yet kind. "Based on what I've heard today, your honesty, your humility, and the values you've reminded this courtroom of, I am reducing your fine to the minimum. And I want you to use the money you saved today to do something good for someone else. Buy a meal for a stranger. Help a neighbor. In that way, justice will continue beyond this courtroom." Gasps and smiles spread across the room. A few people clapped quietly, touched by the decision. The defendant's eyes filled with tears. "Your Honor, thank you. Truly thank you. I promise I will do exactly that." Judge Caprio nodded approvingly. "That is how justice works. Not by tearing people down, but by lifting them up and reminding them of their responsibility to others. That's the lesson Manny Pacquiao lived, and today it lives through you." The man placed his hand over his chest, overwhelmed. "My cousin always said victories are sweeter when they help others. Today, Your Honor, you gave me a victory, not against a ticket, but against forgetting what really matters." The gallery erupted into warm applause, no longer holding back. Even the bailiff cracked a grin, shaking his head at the extraordinary turn the morning had taken. Judge Caprio chuckled softly, lifting his hand to quiet the room once more. All right. Let's not forget, we still have many more cases to get through." But it was clear to everyone present that this case was no longer just about a parking ticket. It had become a story of humility, justice, and the reminder that compassion in authority can change lives. But just when the case seemed resolved, something unexpected happened. The truth about the Pacquiao family connection stunned the entire courtroom even further. The case seemed wrapped up. The fine had been reduced, the lesson delivered, and the courtroom had been reminded of humility and compassion. Many thought that was the end of it. But as the man prepared to step away from the bench, something unexpected happened that made the moment even more powerful. Judge Caprio leaned back slightly, his eyes narrowing with curiosity. "Before you go," he said gently, "tell me something. How close are you really to Manny Pacquiao? You said cousin, but is that distant, or is it, well, family in the truest sense?" The man hesitated. He glanced back at his family in the gallery. They nodded encouragingly, urging him to be honest. Finally, he turned back to the judge, his voice steady but soft. "Your Honor, he's not just a distant cousin. We grew up together. We shared meals, we shared struggles. Manny was like an older brother to me." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. People leaned forward, eyes wide, as if they couldn't quite believe what they had just heard. The judge blinked, visibly moved. "You mean to tell me you actually lived side by side with him before all the lights, before the titles?" The man nodded. Yes, Your Honor. I remember when we had barely enough to eat. Manny worked every job he could find, selling bread, shining shoes, just to help us survive. And then when he started boxing, none of us imagined the world would ever know his name. But through it all, he never changed. Even today when we speak, he asks first about family, about whether everyone is okay. The fame never touched his heart. The gallery fell silent again, but this time the silence was thick with emotion. A woman dabbed her eyes with a tissue. A young man whispered to his friend, "That's unbelievable. He actually grew up with Manny Pacquiao." Judge Caprio sat back in his chair, clearly awestruck. He shook his head slowly, almost in disbelief. "You know, I've met many people in this courtroom, but to meet someone who shared a childhood with one of the greatest boxers and greatest humanitarians of our time, well, that's something I'll never forget." The man lowered his gaze humbly. "Thank you, Your Honor. But for us, he was never just the world champion. He was the one who gave us hope when times were hardest. He told us that life may knock us down, but we always get back up. That's what I carry with me." When the hearing ended, the man quietly returned to his seat. The applause in the courtroom slowly faded, but the feeling it left behind lingered. People were whispering to one another, still stunned that they had just witnessed a piece of Manny Pacquiao's legacy play out in front of them. Not through a fight, but through humility, respect, and justice. But what no one realized in that moment was that the story was only beginning. Like many of Judge Caprio's hearings, the exchange had been recorded. Within hours, clips of the courtroom moment, the revelation of the Pacquiao name, Judge Caprio's heartfelt reflections, and the man's emotional testimony were uploaded online. And once the internet saw it, the video spread like wildfire. On YouTube, it racked up hundreds of thousands of views in a single day. Facebook was flooded with shares and comments poured in from every corner of the world. Justice with compassion. That's how it should be everywhere. This made me cry. Respect to Judge Caprio and to Manny Pacquiao's family. Pacquiao inspires even when he's not in the room. News outlets picked up the story too. Headlines read, "Judge Caprio recognizes Pacquiao legacy in courtroom exchange," and "Viral video shows how humility defines true justice." In the Philippines, the story made national news. People who adored Manny Pacquiao felt a surge of pride seeing how his values were being recognized, even thousands of miles away in a Rhode Island courtroom. Many remarked that it wasn't about celebrity or fame, but about how one man's humility had shaped generations. Even sports commentators weighed in. One wrote, "We often remember Manny for his fists, but the world is reminded here of his heart. His cousin carried that spirit into a courtroom and left everyone inspired." But perhaps the most powerful reaction came from ordinary people. Viewers from across the globe left comments sharing their own struggles and how they were moved by the story. I was about to give up after losing my job, but this reminded me to stand tall. I've been judged unfairly before. This gave me hope that there are still fair people in power. This story proves humility is stronger than pride. Back in Providence, the man himself was overwhelmed. He never imagined that his small traffic violation would become a viral symbol of respect and justice. When asked about it later, he said, "I went to court expecting a fine. I left with a reminder of who I should be, not because of my cousin's fame, but because of the values he taught us." Judge Caprio, too, was asked about the moment in interviews. True to his character, he shifted the attention away from himself. "I didn't do anything extraordinary," he said modestly. "I only did what every judge should do. See the humanity in people." The Pacquiao name simply reminded us all that greatness isn't in titles, but in humility. The video continued to spread, crossing languages and cultures. Subtitled versions appeared in Tagalog, Spanish, Arabic, and more. Millions more watched, commented, and shared. And slowly, the story became more than just about Manny Pacquiao or Judge Caprio. It became a universal message. No one should be judged by appearance, titles, or mistakes. Every person deserves respect. In classrooms, teachers showed the clip to spark discussions about humility. In churches, pastors referenced it in sermons about compassion. Families at dinner tables retold the story as a reminder of why kindness matters. Manny himself, when asked about it, responded with characteristic modesty. "I am humbled," he said, "but this is not about me. It is about showing love and respect to people, always. That is what matters most." The ripple effect was undeniable. What began as a small courtroom case had become a global story of inspiration, proof that even the most ordinary moments can carry extraordinary lessons. And so, as millions continued to watch and share, the message rang clear: justice without compassion is empty. But justice with humility, that changes lives. If you believe that no one should ever be judged by their appearance, their mistakes, or their background, type respect in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories like this one, because the world needs more reminders that kindness is the greatest legacy we can leave behind.